Patience in Santa Clara just became expensive. When a third-round pick is already battling for his roster life after only 1 year, that is not some tiny detail. That is a warning sign. And today the message feels heavy. Draft picks have to turn into impact, veterans can become real solutions, young defenders have to hunt the quarterback, and Brandon Aiyuk is still locked in a standoff that could explode before September. If you care about protecting this championship window the way I do, subscribe right now, because this script is about to separate real pressure from cheap noise. Let's not dress this up anymore. Nick Martin is under serious pressure on this roster. And that hurts because we are not talking about a random camp body just trying to hang around at the bottom of the depth chart. We are talking about a third-round pick. That is an investment that should at minimum be pushing for snaps, pushing on special teams, and pushing towards some kind of clear role. But his first year simply did not give the 49ers that kind of signal. Martin did not get real special teams work until Week 7. Then, when he finally got a tiny defensive opportunity in Week 11, the sample size was small. In Week 12, the injury hit. By the end, he had only 15 defensive snaps across those 2 games, and his season was basically finished right there. You cannot act like that is normal for a franchise that has to win on razor-thin margins. The 49ers may not be ready to give up on him, and I agree that you do not just toss away a third-rounder without training camp, without preseason, and without one last real fight. But the point is different. This linebacker room is not waiting around for Martin to figure everything out. Fred Warner and Dre Greenlaw are the main guys in 2 linebacker looks. Luke Gifford fits as the Sam, with a bigger frame and a more natural role in that package. Tatum Bethune already showed where he sits in the pecking order when Warner went down because he was the backup Mike. Martin, meanwhile, was working behind D. Winters at will. So the picture gets pretty brutal. Bethune inside, Martin as a will piece, Jaden Duggar arriving as a rookie behind Gifford at Sam. And if the 49ers have to trim fat on the roster, those backups better bring real special teams value. There is no poetry here. There are jobs. And that is exactly where Darren Waller makes this a direct threat. He has legitimate special teams experience. He arrived after Martin's injury, started games down the stretch, and did not look overwhelmed. For Martin to win this battle, he has to show more than draft promise. He has to look impossible to cut in August. Because right now, if we are being cold and honest, he feels closer to being the 6th linebacker in this group than the 3rd. For a third-round pick, that is not just bad luck, that is a problem. And this is where the 49ers have to be less romantic and much more ruthless about their own window. George Kittle is the soul, the identity, the physicality, the tough catch, the dirty blocking, and everything that defines Kyle Shanahan's offense. But if there is uncertainty about his availability early in the season because of the Achilles injury he suffered in the playoffs, Santa Clara cannot just fold its arms and act like the playbook will protect itself. That is why the Darren Waller idea makes sense as a conversation, not as some emotional replacement. Nobody is removing Kittle from the heart of this team. This is about offensive survival. This is about one big question. If the 49ers want to enter the season with Brock Purdy protected by real answers, why ignore a tight end who has already shown he can still produce in a similar family of concepts? Dragons Reed sees Waller as a strong option because of that fit. He came out of retirement, beat expectations in Mike McDaniel's system, and finished last season in Miami with 6 receiving touchdowns, tied for the team lead. And that matters because McDaniel comes from the Shanahan coaching tree. The details are not exactly the same, of course, but the offensive language, the use of space, the pre-snap motion, and the way those offenses attack the middle of the field can all shrink the learning curve. For a veteran, that kind of familiarity matters a lot. And there is another piece to this. The 49ers did not attack tight end in the draft. They brought in Khalil Dinkins as an undrafted free agent, a player who can compete, grow, and maybe surprise people. But you cannot sell that as immediate protection if Kittle misses time. If the start of the season demands a stronger plan B, Waller gives you an answer that makes defenses think twice. Now imagine the version where Kittle is active and Waller is also on the roster. Then the conversation shifts from emergency to a nightmare for opposing defenses. 12 personnel, 2 tight ends who can catch the football, an offense that can show heavy run and suddenly flip into a pass over the middle. That is Shanahan with one more blade sitting on the table. The aggressive point is simple. Contenders do not wait for the hole to open before they start looking for help. Contenders get ahead of it. If the price is manageable and Waller's body responds, the 49ers have every reason to explore that conversation all the way through. Now let's get into the stat that should have had everybody in Santa Clara angry all offseason. 20 sacks. 20. Fewest in the NFL. For a defense with the name, the weight, and the expectations of the San Francisco 49ers, that is not just bad. That is offensive. That is the kind of number that lets opposing quarterbacks sleep too comfortably, lets offensive coordinators call games too calmly, and leaves fans staring at the screen asking one painful question. Where is the violence from this front? And yes, there is context. Nick Bosa's season was cut short by an ACL injury. Bryce Huff led the team with only 4 sacks before abruptly retiring after the 2025 campaign. But context cannot become a hiding place. The 49ers knew they needed help. They needed motor. They needed somebody who steps on the field hungry to wreck the rhythm of the other offense. That is why Romello Height came in the 3rd round, pick 70, out of Texas Tech with a profile that screams immediate situational pressure. When he was told about the 49ers' pass rush struggles, his answer was short and confident. Humbly, I will be able to help them with that. That is exactly the posture I want to hear. Not empty talk, not some over-rehearsed answer. Confidence with control, but still confidence, because this defense does not need a scared rookie asking for permission. It needs somebody who can jump into sub-packages and attack like every snap is a chance to steal a possession. The production at Texas Tech explains why John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan bought into the idea. Height had 10 sacks, 38 tackles, and 11.5 tackles for loss in 2025. He generated 62 pressures on 350 pass rush snaps and earned a 92.6 pass rush grade from Pro Football Focus. Lynch talked about his toughness, his persistence, and the way he plays without ever turning it off. Shanahan was even more direct. On that hair-on-fire grade, Height was at the top. That is the whole point. The 49ers are not just trying to find another body to fill out the rotation. They are trying to put fear back inside the pocket. Height is 6'3", 239 pounds, so maybe he begins as a clear passing down piece. He admitted he can see himself adding weight. Fine, build the body, learn against NFL tackles, and understand the plan. But right now, his speed, technique, and energy can already bring real value. If Bosa comes back right, if Mykel Williams responds after his ACL recovery, if Osa Odigizua and Grayson Halton also help push that front, Height can be the accelerator that changes the feel of this defense. The Niners' war room has to answer this. Do you want to see this kid unleashed early on 3rd downs, or do you want a slower ramp up? Because after 20 sacks, too much patience starts looking like complicity. And now comes the storyline nobody in Santa Clara can simply sweep under the rug. Brandon Aiyuk. Because the 49ers are not rushing to release the receiver, but they are also not pretending this situation looks pretty. The team would love for somebody to come in with a trade. The problem is that any interested team looks at the board and thinks the same thing. If San Francisco might eventually let Aiyuk go later anyway, why give up real capital now? That is exactly why this standoff is so frustrating. The franchise is trying to keep some leverage. Potential suitors are trying to wait. And Aiyuk is stuck in the middle of a situation that already carries too much tension, especially after not playing football since his ACL and MCL tears in October 2024. The Washington Commanders have been viewed as a possible destination, with expected interest once things unlock, according to the read Ian Rappaport brought during the draft. But interest is not payment. Interest does not solve a contract. Interest does not put a pick on the table. The date that really tightens this whole story is September 1. According to Over the Cap, Aiyuk is due a $9.558 million option bonus on that day. And let's talk like adults here. It is very hard to imagine the 49ers getting past that date with him still attached to the roster if the team is not willing to pay that number. So even if this thing drags through the summer, there is a heavy clock running behind the scenes. And I am going to defend the 49ers here with no apology. This franchise does not have to kneel just because the market wants to wait and get him cheaper. If Washington or any other team believes Aiyuk can still be an important piece, then they also have to understand the cost of waiting. The later he gets to a new team, the less time he has to acclimate, regain rhythm, learn details, build chemistry, and make an early impact in 2026. That matters. The buying team carries risk too, but the 49ers also cannot play tug of war until the rope burns their hands. There is a difference between strategic patience and expensive stubbornness. If the best real offer comes before the deadline, Santa Clara has to evaluate it coldly. If it does not, the decision becomes financial and unavoidable. That is the tough part. There is no guaranteed perfect ending. There is only the best move available before the calendar makes the decision for the front office. At the end of the day, these four stories all say the same thing in different ways. The 49ers are being forced to decide who actually helps right now. Nick Martin has to prove value before that roster spot starts slipping away. Darren Waller is an aggressive idea to protect the offense. Romello Height arrives to attack an embarrassing stat that cannot happen again. And Aiyuk has become a test of leverage, money, and courage before September 1. Santa Clara does not have room for pretty optics anymore. It has to get this right. If you want to follow this fight every day, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and come back tomorrow.